Jessie Inchauspy, the glucose goddess. We spoke 2 years ago, and in that time, I feel like there's been a real glucose revolution, much of which has been led by you. Your books have sold millions and millions and millions of copies around the world. Your conversations online have millions and millions and millions and millions of views, more than I could possibly count. What's going on with glucose?
The thing is, glucose has always been incredibly important to our health, but it's been going on behind the scenes. But now, with the technology that we have, glucose monitors, new science, we're actually able to get a real good handle on it and understand our diet through that lens. So most of us, Stephen, have unhealthy glucose levels. To give you an example, 1 billion people in the world have either type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. 1 billion. And that number is increasing every single day. And then in people who don't have any health issues, up to 80% of the population still has glucose spikes every single day. And this leads to lots of symptoms, from mental health problems to fertility to acne to faster aging. Glucose is really important, and I'm really happy that we're talking about it more.
What have you been surprised by how much people have woken up to glucose sugar?
Yeah, definitely. I think even the word glucose, people used to know blood sugar, but now the fact that people know what glucose is makes me quite happy. That's the scientific way to refer to blood sugar. It's surprising, but the thing is, like, I'm on the inside. I'm working every single day to make sure people know what glucose is. So it's like, you know, when you put the frog in the water and then you slowly boil the water, you know that image, and the frog doesn't notice the water is boiling? That's how I feel, because I've been doing this for 5 years now. So I can tell now, if I compare today to 5 years ago, there's been a huge shift, but I've been looking at it every single day, day by day, and the increase has been very gradual.
How do you define yourself? There's this sort of name you go under, the glucose goddess, but professionally, if someone says, what do you do? How do you define that?
I say I'm a biochemist. Okay. I'm a biochemist, passionate about sharing science in a fun, accessible, sexy way. That's what I like to do.
These CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, that everybody seems to be wearing these days, they're much of the reason people, I guess, know you, because you post these incredible graphs on your Instagram showing the impact of the things we on our glucose levels. Yeah. I want to start there. When I eat something sweet and full of sugar, there's a spike in my CGM, so my continuous glucose monitor. Does the spike mean that something bad is going on in my body?
Kind of, yeah. So I'll go just one step back. There's lots of different categories of foods, but there are two that impact our blood sugar levels. It's sugars, so anything sweet. From these two categories of foods, they're literally made up of glucose molecules. So when you eat them, they break down into individual glucose molecules, and the glucose molecules arrive into your blood. If you eat a lot of starches and sugars at once, a lot of glucose molecules are arriving into your blood. And that's what you see. That's the spike you see on your glucose monitor. Now, these spikes have a few different consequences. You know, having a few spikes here and there is not a big deal, but if you have really big spikes, which I think most of us are discovering we have, even if we don't have diabetes, that's when problems start happening. And there's basically 3 processes that take place in your body when you spike. It's chronic fatigue of your mitochondria, aging, glycation, and then insulin release. And I can go into detail into these, but these are what underpin all the negative consequences of glucose spikes.
So start with that first one.
Okay.
The mitochondria.
So the mitochondria is the factory of the cell. These little mitochondria are constantly trying to make energy for your body. And they turn glucose into energy. So you give them glucose through food, they turn it into energy, and then your brain uses the energy, your heart to pump, your ears to listen, your eyes to see. Your whole body uses this energy. And so you might think, okay, I want lots of energy, so I should give my mitochondria lots of glucose. That's the logical conclusion you 100%. Might come to. But that's where it completely collapses. See, biology is a bit weird. Take the example of a plant. Do you have any plants at home?
I do, yeah.
Okay. Are you able to keep them alive?
My cleaner does a great job of keeping all of them alive.
I have a super hard time. But the reason I'm bringing up plants is because you know that plants need some water to live. But if you give them too much water, they drown and they die. The human body is kind of the same. Some glucose, amazing, steady energy. Too much glucose and your little mitochondria start freaking out. They get overwhelmed by too much glucose arriving their way. They kind of go on strike. And I'm French, so I know but they sort of go on strike and they get overwhelmed and stressed out and they're not able to make energy effectively anymore because we're overloading them with too much glucose to process. And as a human, what do you feel? You feel chronic fatigue. You wake up, you're exhausted. Thinking of going to the grocery store or picking up your kids is super tiring. There's this energy system in your body is just kind of broken. But you keep eating carbs, a croissant, some bread, something sweet, but you keep being more and more tired. That's your mitochondria dysfunctioning. So that's the first thing that happens when you spike. You get tired. Your mitochondria get stressed out. And one thing that's interesting is that sometimes when we eat something sweet, especially in the morning, like an orange juice, we kind of feel a sense of like a rush of energy. You have a big glass of orange juice and you sort of perk up for a sec. Most people think that that is energy. What's actually going on is that sugar releases dopamine in the brain. And it's the pleasure molecule. It's the same molecule that gets released when you have sex, when you play video games, when you do illegal drugs. Sugar releases dopamine. It's pleasure. It makes you kind of feel awake, just briefly. But actually, that's not energy because on the inside, your mitochondria are being damaged. So we're being tricked by sugary foods. And when we're tired, we often reach for something sugary to perk us up, but it doesn't work on the inside. So that's the first thing. Your mitochondria gets stressed out. And as your mitochondria get stressed out, they also release what's called free radicals, which is something that increases inflammation in the body. And inflammation is a really nasty thing. We'll get to it in a sec. The second thing that happens when you spike has to do with a chicken cooking in the oven. So if you you're looking at me weird, but let me explain. If you put a chicken in the oven, it goes from pink to brown, right? You've seen this. It cooks. This process of cooking is called glycation. It's the process of browning or of cooking. Same thing when you toast a piece of toast, for example. The interesting thing is, a human being, from the moment we're born, we're slowly cooking in that same way on the inside. We're slowly glycating. We're slowly browning. And then when we're fully glycated, when we're fully cooked, we die. That's why when you look at the cartilage of babies, it's white. And if you look at the cartilage of somebody who's 90 years old, it's brown. They've cooked on the inside. And every glucose spike increases. You're looking at your skin?
Yeah, I'm looking on the outside.
We'd have to open you up and look at your cartilage color.
I've got about 10 minutes left.
No, stupid. And every glucose spike increases this process of glycation. So much so that glucose and glycation, they kind of sound like a similar word, glucose glycation. It's because it's glucose doing the glycating. So every glucose spike increases glycation, increases cooking, accelerates aging. And this shows on your skin. You get wrinkles faster if you glycate more. And also on the inside, your organs slowly get damaged. So glucose spikes, mitochondria get tired, you age faster. In response to this, your body knows, Stephen, that a big glucose spike is not good for you. Your body knows that it has to do something to try to get that glucose level down. So what it does, it calls up your pancreas and it's like, yo, pancreas, we got a glucose spike going on. We need to get this glucose down. In response, your pancreas sends a hormone called insulin out in your body. You've heard of insulin before, right? Mm-hmm. And insulin's job, and we love her job is to grab all these excess glucose molecules and to store them away so they don't damage your body anymore. And insulin stores glucose away into your liver, into your muscles, and then when those are full, insulin stores glucose away into your fat cells. And that's one of the ways that you gain fat on your body. It's in response to the spikes and your body trying to protect you from the spikes. The problem is, insulin itself has consequences and is the driver of type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. So to answer your question, yes, when you see a big spike on your glucose monitor, there's some of that going on. And the more spikes you have, the harder it is going to be for your body to manage your spikes. So it kind of becomes a vicious cycle. If you keep eating the same way, your spikes will get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over time with more and more damage.
On that last point about where insulin stores the excess glucose, does that mean that if I have more muscle mass, I'm better at eating sugary products?
Yep. And that's why if you really love cookies, the best time to eat them is right after you work out or right before you work out, because your muscles are really hungry for glucose all the time. And the bigger your muscles are, the more you use them, the more they're going to capture some of that glucose for energy.
Okay, so me and my partner, we both go to the gym. She is significantly smaller than me in every way. She's short. She's lean. I'm bigger than her. I have more muscle mass. That means that if I have one cookie and she has the exact same cookie, then her glucose response is going to be potentially significantly different to mine.
Yes, potentially. So if you just look at muscle mass, since you have more muscle mass, you'll be able to handle that cookie better. But there's so many things that influence glucose response. For example, your level of hydration, how stressed you are, your microbiome, your genetics, what time of the month you're in when you're female, how well you've slept last night. I mean, there's a few factors. So if you were just to compare your spike to hers, you couldn't really draw any conclusions because there's so many confounding variables.
Those confounding variables, give me a window into some of them and why they matter and how they have an impact on my glucose response.
So I think muscles is a really good example, right? If two people eat the same exact cookie, the person with more muscle mass is going to potentially see a smaller glucose spike because their muscles are going to absorb more of that glucose and faster. If you look at genetics, some people are better at growing their fat cells and at growing the number and the size of their fat cells. So they have a bigger reservoir to put glucose in. People of South Asian descent, for example, they tend to have a harder time putting on fat cells. And as a result, their glucose spikes tend to be bigger because they don't have that storage unit that they can access and increase the size of. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Are there any foods that you have been surprised at when you've tested them? Because this is one of the really shocking things that I discovered when I wore a continuous glucose monitor, is I would eat some things that I've been eating for a long, long time, and they would cause a spike. And I was like, what? I thought that was healthy.
Yeah.
But what are those things, I guess, for the
surprising ones?
Yeah, the surprising ones, not just for you, but for people that message you and go, oh my God, Jessie, I've been lied to about my tomato ketchup.
Okay, I think the biggest ones are honey and grapes.
Okay.
So grapes first. You think it's a fruit. It's healthy. It's natural. It's good for me, right? Well, actually, all the fruit that we find today in supermarkets is not natural. It is the product of human breeding for thousands and thousands of years to make them extra sweet, extra juicy. In the same way that humans have been breeding dogs from the time of the gray wolves into chihuahuas and golden retrievers. These are not natural types of dogs. We've bred wolves into these dogs. Fruit is the same thing. We've bred species of fruit to make these beautiful grapes without any seeds and just this little pocket of sugar. And so a grape, when you look at it, actually, it's just a big dose of sugar. It's in the fruit format, so people think it's good for them. But actually, when it comes to your glucose levels, it's just big glucose spike. So those are really surprising.
All fruits?
It varies, right? So for example, berries are lower in sugar, so create a smaller spike. But any tropical fruit like bananas, mangoes, papayas, and then grapes also, those are really high in sugar. Yeah. But the thing is, a piece of whole fruit is okay because it has fiber in it. The real problem comes when you denature that piece of fruit and you turn it into a juice, for example, because then you're removing that protective fiber and just extracting the water and the sugar.
Yeah, I've not drank a glass of juice since starting this podcast because so many people I've spoken to have told me that it's just like drinking sugar water.
Yeah, it's just like drinking a can of Coke. But people think, well, it comes from a piece of fruit, so it's natural. Orange juice comes from oranges. Therefore, it's good for you because it's natural. What they don't realize is that the sugar in a can of soda is also natural. It comes from sugar beets or canes. So if you're really looking at the source of the sugar, you realize it doesn't matter at all. They all come from plants. What matters is the concentration and the medium that the sugar is in.
I understand grapes causing a glucose spike because when I taste it, it tastes sweet. But there's some things that I eat that don't taste sweet that cause a glucose spike. And those are the things that I think lie to me.
Like bread?
Like bread.
Yeah.
Like rice.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, glucose is actually not sweet. What you're tasting in fruit is fructose. So let me explain. So starches like bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, oats, those are starches. Those are literally millions of glucose molecules just attached hand to hand like this. That's a starch. It's just a long chain of glucose. When you eat the starch, poof, it turns into individual glucose molecules, raises your blood sugar, even though it doesn't taste sweet. In a piece of fruit or in sugar, you're not eating starch. What you're eating is sucrose, a different kind of molecule, which is half glucose, half fructose.
Oh.
Yeah. So when it breaks down, it gives you glucose and a spike, but also fructose that tastes really sweet, but doesn't raise your blood sugar levels that much.
So again, on the other side of the coin then, are there foods that taste sweet but don't have an impact on my glucose?
Yes. Sweeteners, stevia, aspartame, things like that.
So are you saying that I should put sweeteners in my food as opposed to sugar?
Well, I think people need to realize that even though sweeteners are not super good for us, right? Of course, it's better to drink water than a diet soda. The diet soda is better for you than the regular can of soda with the 30 grams of real sugar in there. I personally would never have a can of real soda. I would always have the diet soda. Always, always, always. Because those sweeteners don't raise your blood sugar levels, okay? They don't create that big spike and that big insulin spike and then the drop.
Is there such a good thing as good sugar? Is there any such thing as good sugar?
No. People often believe that if the sugar is coming from a fruit and is for example, in a fruit smoothie that they might have in the morning, that's good sugar, but that sugar that's in a cake is bad sugar. So people tend to compare these two and say, oh, well, I'm having a fruit smoothie that's good for me, but oh, that chocolate cake would be bad for me. That's a total lie. It's all the same molecules. The molecules in that fruit smoothie and the molecules in that chocolate cake are the same. It's sucrose. It's the same stuff. And your body doesn't differentiate whether the sugar is in a fruit smoothie or the sugar is in a chocolate cake. So all sugar is the same. Even, honey, agave, maple syrup, all these things that have these health halos because of marketing, it's all the same molecules. So I recommend that people just have the sugar that they like best. Don't think that one is going to be better for you than the other. And have all sugar as dessert. So that fruit smoothie, that's also dessert. It's not super healthy because it comes from fruit. It's just like the chocolate cake.
And is there such a thing as good sweeteners and bad sweeteners?
Yeah, so there's a few categories. So the ones that seem to be really fine for us are stevia, monk fruit, and allulose. The ones that have been linked to quite a few health issues are aspartame, maltitol, sucralose. So, for example, aspartame, you usually find it in soda. Whereas stevia, you might buy a little packet at home and put it in your tea. That being said, the aspartame is still better for you than the real can of Coke with the 30 grams of real sugar.
So stevia is something that I shouldn't be
No, stevia is good. Yeah, you shouldn't be too concerned. Do you use stevia?
I don't put any sweeteners in anything. I don't put sugar in anything either. So I'm trying to stay away. When I have coffee, it's just black coffee.
You don't even usually find it in soda.
Of course I...
Whereas stevia,
chocolate
you might
maybe
buy a
not
little
so much.
packet
Maybe
at
that's
home and put
not
it in
my
your
thing.
tea.
But
What's your sweet thing?
Carrot cake. What's your sweet thing?
Oh, chocolate. I love chocolate. Like my favorite is like chocolate ice cream with a chocolate brownie and chocolate sauce and chocolate sprinkles. Anything chocolate.
That's not very glucose goddess.
Well, here's where you're wrong, Stephen.
Okay.
I'm actually not anti-sugar.
What are you talking about?
No, I love sugar. I eat sugar, I eat carbs all the time, but I want people to know what I know, which is how and when to eat those things.
That's the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for coming. It's really, really great to see you again.
No, but seriously, we need to learn how to eat these things because they're so delicious in a way that's less bad for our health. It's not about cutting them out. That would be a diet. I'm not pro diets. I'm pro knowledge. And I want to make sure people are not having sugar and dessert for breakfast. Sweet cereal in the morning and orange juice. That's dessert. Anyway, I'm all about just trying to empower people with the information so they don't get trapped by these marketing lies.
Are we meant to be eating the amounts of sugar that we eat, though? Because, are we meant to be eating any sugar? What does our sort of evolutionary history tell us about our relationship with glucose? I
think fruit is something we're meant to be eating, but the fruit that used to exist was less sweet and harder to digest and more fibrous. And then in terms of starches are totally fine to eat. The problem is today, most of us just eat sugar and starches. We've completely lost touch with the nice proteins and the organ meats and the fiber and the healthy fats. We're in a situation where the food landscape is so toxic and is so just starches and sugars that people are getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And it's addictive and it's cheap. So we're in a very difficult situation. And that's the situation that, the GLP-1s are trying to solve. We're in a pickle. We are in a pickle.
Are you optimistic about the pickle we're in as it relates to sugar and glucose?
I have to say yes, because the amount of transformations I see in my readers is really encouraging. You know, people are reclaiming their health, getting power over it, understanding food again. But we've got a lot of work to do. And I can do my work educating people from the ground up on these hacks, but we also need like systemic change. We need policy. We need governments to get involved, and we need to find ways to make healthier food because we're just killing the population right now. It's really terrible.
So talking about some of the consequences of a high glucose diet, one of them you mentioned earlier when we were talking about glycation is aging. Has anyone ever done any research to prove that a high glucose diet is associated or correlated with increased or accelerated aging?
I mean, yes, because we see that the people who eat the most sugar get the most diseases. Right? So we see correlations, but they're not like a clinical trial. You can't take two populations and say, okay, everybody's 30 years old. We're going to give this half a healthy, no glucose spike diet and this half glucose spikes every single day. And then we'll see when they're 80, which group has aged faster. We can't do that. That's unethical. So we have to look at correlations. Mm-hmm. And we see things like if you have really high glucose levels, high insulin levels, you're more likely to get heart disease, dementia, depression, et cetera, et cetera. We have correlative studies, and we understand the mechanism of the glycation.
What about the superficial signs of aging? Wrinkles.
Oh, like the wrinkles?
Skin
A lot of skincare products actually target glycation from the outside in. So they'll put like antioxidants on your skin to reduce glycation. If you're in the skincare world, you'll see glycation mentioned everywhere. What they don't do is they don't look at how to reduce glycation from the inside out, which is what I think is more interesting. And it's through food. By reducing your glucose levels, you reduce glycation. It's just like A to B. It's very simple.
So if I want to stave off wrinkles, then I should keep my glucose levels down.
Yes. And you should also avoid smoking, wear sunscreen, etc. But in terms of your diet, what you want to focus on is focus on reducing glucose spikes. Yeah, absolutely.
What about things like acne and skin conditions?
So those are more inflammatory-based diseases. So eczema, psoriasis, acne, rosacea, those are expressions of inflammation going on within your body. And I like to think of the skin as a mirror to what's going on within. And so inflammation can happen through loads of different factors, but one of the factors is glucose spikes. So glucose spikes hurt our mitochondria. That creates inflammation. Then glucose spikes lead to glycation, which also leads to inflammation, and insulin release. And a lot of insulin also increases inflammation. So with every glucose spike, you're increasing inflammation within your body. And if you're susceptible to any of these skin conditions, you can have flare-ups or increase their intensity, very simply.
And does it also have an impact on my hormonal balance? A lot of my friends, I'm in that age range now where a lot of my friends are trying to have children.
Yeah.
And there's so much talk around things like polycystic ovary syndrome and fertility and, infertility in men with their sperm and all these kinds of things. Is there a link between glucose and hormones and fertility?
Yes. So we have studies that show that the more insulin resistant you are, so insulin resistance is a consequence of just a lot of insulin in the body, the more likely you are to be infertile. And then we also know that PCOS, so polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is one of the leading causes of infertility in women, we know that 60% of PCOS cases also are people who have insulin resistance. There's a link there. Insulin resistant, you're more likely to have PCOS. And we also know that when there's a lot of insulin in a female body, it tells your ovaries to produce more testosterone. Testosterone is the male sex hormone. And if you have too much male sex hormone in the body, that causes issues. It can cause acne, it can cause balding or hair growth on the face, and it can stop your period. Now, often when somebody has PCOS, they're given the birth control pill, which kind of makes sense on the surface, but really doesn't solve anything. What happens when you take the birth control pill is that you're just ingesting female hormones. That's what the pill is. It's female hormones. So if you have high testosterone, all of a sudden you're ingesting female hormones. So the balance kind of comes back to an okay situation. Your symptoms of excess testosterone go away. But as soon as you stop the pill, the high testosterone is still there. So a lot of people stop the pill trying to have a baby and they're like, oh, I don't have my period. I have PCOS. What do I do? So one recommendation I have is if you have PCOS, look at your glucose spikes first. It's not the only reason this can happen, but very often when you fix your glucose and insulin levels, the symptoms of PCOS go away.
I saw something on Twitter a couple of weeks ago that was trying to make the case that glucose and insulin responses are the reason for PCOS.
Yeah.
Some people believe that.
Totally. And, it's a very politically charged topic. Some people believe you have PCOS. It's genetic. You can't do anything about it. Other people believe, no, it's a metabolic disease. It's a cluster of symptoms that come from high insulin. I'm in that camp. But, there are some cases where somebody has PCOS and doesn't have high insulin levels. So what category do they go into? The thing with PCOS, Stephen, is that it's not a real condition. It's like a cluster of symptoms. So some people could have PCOS and have cystic ovaries and balding. Somebody else could have PCOS and have, missed periods and hair growth on their chin. So it can take different forms. So I think we're starting to understand there are variations of PCOS, and some are in the insulin-resistant category.
Have you seen a woman reverse her PCOS symptoms?
Tons. In my second book, I ran a study. 3 females who were in the program doing my hacks for just a month got their period back and were able to get pregnant in that month just with my hacks. I see PCOS reversal all the time.
So these hacks that you say those 3 women used to help reverse their PCOS symptoms, what are the hacks?
Oh, the hacks.
What are the ones that they did?
So the ones they did were savory breakfast, vinegar once a day, veggie starters, and moving after eating. And these are 4 hacks that are the 4 most important ones of my 10 hacks that I've put together in the 4-week method, that second book. And if you do these hacks, you don't actually have to change anything else that you're eating. You don't have to cut out anything. You just add these in. I like to see them like little fairy godmothers that you have in your pocket and you just put throughout your day like this. And you're able to reduce your glucose spikes while still eating what you love in a very low effort kind of way. And I believe these hacks should be seen like you would see: brush your teeth, wear sunscreen, drink enough water, have a savory breakfast, move after eating.
Have a savory breakfast. So are you saying people shouldn't be eating sugar for breakfast?
Correct. So the concept of a savory breakfast comes from the simple realization that if you have a breakfast that creates a big glucose spike, you're affecting your body in many bad ways. First of all, you're leading to your brain not functioning too well during that day. It's leading to brain fog. It can make you a bit confused. Second, it makes you tired. It increases cravings throughout the day, and it also deregulates your glucose levels for the rest of the day. Your breakfast is very powerful. If you have a glucose spike at breakfast, your whole day is a glucose roller coaster. So what you want to do, Stephen, is always have a savory breakfast that keeps your glucose levels steady. A savory breakfast is what? It's based around protein. Eggs, fish, meat, tofu, nuts, dairy, protein powder, dinner leftovers, okay? Protein. It's really important to have protein in the morning. Then you add some healthy fats, olive oil, butter, avocado. And then, if you want, for taste, you can add a bit of starch, like a piece of bread, for example, or some potatoes. Importantly, a savory breakfast contains nothing sweet. No cereal, no muffins, no orange juice, no granola, no fruit puree, none of that. It's really key.
Sugar in my coffee?
No. If you want sugar, have it as dessert after a meal, after lunch or after dinner. Because after your lunch and after your dinner, you have lots of food already in the digestive system. So any sugar you put in afterwards is going to impact your glucose levels less.
You said that if I have something sweet for my breakfast, I'm then going to be on a glucose roller coaster.
Yeah.
Why?
Because glucose spike, then insulin comes out and your glucose drop. Then your glucose are low. Here, you get really hungry. You have a lot of cravings. When our glucose levels are dropping, scientists have shown it increases the activity of the craving center in our brain. So it goes like, Stephen, eat some sugar, and you can't control that. So what do? You reach for more sugar. Bam, another glucose spike. And then you just continue your whole day like that. So you sort of put yourself into a corner if you start your day with a spike. And it's really difficult to get off that roller coaster.
Does that roller coaster last across days?
Good question. Generally, during the night, it sort of resets.